Steve Harvey had been hosting Family Feud for nearly 2 decades, and he thought he had developed the emotional capacity to handle virtually any situation that arose on stage. He had witnessed confessions that shocked audiences, heard testimonies of sacrifice that moved millions to tears, and listened to stories that had challenged everything he thought he knew about memory, trauma, and the moments that define entire lives. But on that cold March afternoon in 2027, a 56-year-old man named Robert Chen would reveal something so specific, so haunting in its detail and in the way it had shaped every moment of his life for 43 years, that Steve would stand stunned and speechless, literally unable to form words for nearly a full minute. Because what Robert was describing was a single moment, lasting less than 60 seconds, that he had been unable to forget for 4 decades, and hearing the details of that moment and understanding its ongoing impact would leave everyone in the studio shaken by how profoundly a brief experience can alter the entire trajectory of a human life. 2 families stood ready to compete, the Patterson family from Florida and the Chen family from Washington. The Chen family drew immediate attention because at their center stood Robert Chen, a composed but haunted-looking 56-year-old man with graying hair, dark eyes that held profound sadness, and a bearing that suggested someone carrying an invisible burden. He wore a simple button-down shirt and slacks, and he kept touching his left wrist repeatedly, as if checking for something that wasn't there. Standing with him were his wife Susan, his adult daughter Michelle, who was 30, his son David, who was 27, and his elderly mother, who was in her 80s and clearly frail. During the pre-interview, Robert had been articulate but clearly struggling with something. When asked what made his family special, he had said something cryptic. "I'm here today because there's something I've carried with me every single day for 43 years. A memory so vivid, so detailed, so present that it's like it happened this morning instead of in 1984 when I was 13 years old. It's a memory I've never been able to forget, never been able to move past, and it's shaped every decision I've made, every relationship I've had, every moment of my life, and I think I need to finally speak it out loud in detail, because maybe if I share it, it will lose some of its power over me." Robert's wife Susan, when asked about what Robert might reveal, had spoken with obvious concern. "Robert has told me about this memory over the years, but never in full detail, never completely. He says it's something from when he was 13 that he can't forget, something that happens in his mind every single day, something that wakes him up at night. He has PTSD from this memory. He's been in therapy for decades, he's on medication, but nothing makes it go away. He says it's burned into his brain with such clarity that 43 years later, he can still see every detail, hear every sound, smell every smell. It's not just a memory for him, it's something he relives constantly, and it's destroying him." The Chen family won their game with Robert contributing several answers in a quiet voice. As they lined up for fast money, Robert stepped to the podium, and before Steve could begin the questions, Robert held up his hand and said, "Mr. Harvey, I can't play this game without first telling you about the one thing I could never forget, the memory that's defined my entire life, the 60 seconds that happened 43 years ago that I relive every single day with perfect clarity. I need to tell you about it because maybe speaking it will help me finally let it go." Steve's expression shifted to one of serious attention, and he said gently, "Robert, tell me what you need to tell me." The studio fell quiet, and Robert took several deep breaths before beginning to speak, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "On June 3, 1984, I was 13 years old. I was walking home from school in Seattle. It was 3:47 p.m. on a Tuesday afternoon, sunny, about 68 degrees, a perfect spring day. I remember every detail because what happened next burned that entire day into my memory with such intensity that I can recall details most people wouldn't even notice." Robert paused, touching his left wrist again, and continued, "I was walking on Pine Street, heading toward the bus stop. I was about a block away when I heard tires screeching. I looked up and saw a car, a blue sedan, a Ford Taurus, license plate number that started with KJH, coming down the street too fast. The driver was trying to stop but couldn't, and directly in the path of that car was a little girl, maybe 5 or 6 years old, with blonde pigtails, wearing a yellow dress with white flowers on it. She had stepped off the curb to chase a red ball that had bounced into the street. The studio was completely silent, everyone already sensing something terrible was coming. Robert's voice became more detailed, almost trance-like, as he continued, "I saw everything that happened next in perfect, horrible clarity. The car was going maybe 40 miles per hour. The driver, a woman in her 30s with brown hair, wearing sunglasses, was screaming and slamming on the brakes. The little girl looked up and saw the car coming. Her expression changed from joy. She was smiling because she'd caught her ball. To confusion, then to terror. She tried to move, but she was too late. The car hit her. Steve's face showed horror and several people in the audience gasped or cried out. Robert said, "The impact happened at exactly 3:48 p.m. I know because I looked at my watch right after it happened. I don't know why, maybe because my brain was trying to make sense of what I'd just seen by focusing on concrete details." The sound was. Robert paused, clearly struggling. "The sound was something I hear in my nightmares. The thud of the car hitting her body, the screech of the brakes, the scream from a woman who must have been the child's mother, who had been standing on the sidewalk and watched her daughter get hit. The little girl flew, maybe 15 feet from the impact, and landed on the pavement. The red ball bounced away and rolled into a storm drain." Robert's hands were shaking now, and he said, "I ran toward her. I was 13 years old, I had no medical training, I didn't know what to do, but I ran toward her. Other people were running too. The driver of the car got out. The mother was screaming and running to her daughter. Someone was yelling for someone to call 911. When I got to the little girl, she was lying on the pavement. There was blood coming from her head, pooling on the street. Her eyes were open, and she was looking at me. She tried to say something, but no words came out. I knelt down next to her. I don't know why, I just did, and I held her hand. Her hand was small and warm, and she squeezed my hand. She looked directly at me, right into my eyes, and I saw the exact moment she died." The studio erupted in cries and gasps, and Steve's face showed he was completely devastated by what he was hearing. Robert continued, tears now streaming down his face. "She was looking at me, squeezing my hand, and then suddenly the light just went out. That's the only way I can describe it. 1 second she was there, present, a person looking at me, and the next second she was gone. Her hand went limp, her eyes went empty, and she was dead. The whole thing, from the moment the car hit her to the moment she died in front of me, was maybe 60 seconds. 60 seconds that I have relived every single day for 43 years. Robert's voice broke completely, and he said, "I don't know who she was. The ambulance came, they took her body, the police took statements from witnesses including me, and then I went home and never heard anything about her again. I don't know her name. I don't know if she had siblings, what her favorite food was, what she wanted to be when she grew up. All I know is that she was maybe 5 or 6 years old, she was wearing a yellow dress with white flowers, she was chasing a red ball, and she died holding my hand while looking into my eyes. And that 60 seconds has defined my entire life." Steve was sitting on the floor now, visibly struggling to process what he was hearing. Robert said, "For 43 years, I have relived that moment every single day. I see it when I close my eyes. I dream about it at least 3 times a week. I can still feel her hand in mine, still see the exact expression on her face, still hear the sounds, still smell the smell of the pavement and the blood. I've been in therapy since I was 16 trying to process this. I've been on medication for PTSD for decades. I've tried EMDR, cognitive behavioral therapy, exposure therapy, everything. Nothing makes the memory go away. Nothing makes it less vivid. 43 years later, it's as clear and as present as if it happened this morning." Robert looked at Steve and said, "That memory has shaped every decision I've made. I became a pediatric emergency physician because of that little girl, because I was 13 years old and didn't know how to help her, and I wanted to make sure I could help children in the future. I've saved lives in my career, but every child I save, I think about the one I couldn't save when I was 13. I had panic attacks when my own children were young because I was terrified something would happen to them. I can't watch movies or TV shows with children in danger because it triggers the memory. I had to leave the room when my grandchildren were learning to cross streets because the anxiety was unbearable. He continued, "I'm telling you this now, publicly, because I'm 56 years old and I can't carry this memory alone anymore. I need to speak it out loud, in all its terrible detail, because maybe if I share it, if I let other people witness what I witnessed, it will lose some of its power over me. I've carried the image of that little girl dying in front of me for 43 years, and I need to finally acknowledge that I can't forget it, that it's part of me forever, but that maybe I can learn to live with it instead of being controlled by it." Steve finally found his voice, though it was shaking badly. He said, "Robert, I don't even have words. You witnessed a child die when you were 13 years old. You held her hand as she died. And that memory has been so vivid, so persistent, that 43 years later you can recall every detail, what she was wearing, the exact time, the license plate number, the sound of the impact. That's not just a memory. That's trauma that's been alive inside you for your entire adult life. I can't imagine carrying that for 4 decades. Robert nodded and said, "Most people don't understand, Mr. Harvey. They think memory fades over time, that trauma gets less intense as years pass, but this hasn't faded. If anything, it's become more detailed over time, because I've replayed it so many times in my mind. I can close my eyes right now and see her face, see the yellow dress with the white flowers, see her hand in mine, see the exact moment the life left her eyes. It's not a memory that I recall when I think about it. It's a memory that intrudes into my consciousness constantly, whether I want it to or not." Steve said, "Have you ever tried to find out who she was? To learn her name or connect with her family?" Robert shook his head and said, "No. I thought about it many times over the years, but I was too afraid. Afraid that knowing more details would make the memory more powerful. Afraid that connecting with her family would open wounds for them, and for me. So she's remained nameless to me. Just the little girl in the yellow dress who died holding my hand on June 3, 1984, at 3:48 p.m. on Pine Street in Seattle." Robert's mother, who had been silent until now, spoke up in a frail voice. She said, "I'm Robert's mother, and I've watched my son be tortured by this memory for 43 years. He was 13 years old when it happened, and he came home that day completely traumatized. He couldn't sleep, couldn't eat, kept crying and saying he couldn't get the image of her dying out of his mind. We got him therapy, we did everything we could, but nothing helped. That little girl's death has haunted my son his entire adult life, shaped his career, affected his relationships, given him PTSD that he's still dealing with at 56 years old. 1 minute, 60 seconds of his life, when he was 13, has defined everything that came after. The episode that aired became one of the most emotionally powerful and discussed programs in Family Feud history. Robert's testimony about witnessing a child's death at age 13 and carrying that memory with perfect, haunting clarity for 43 years resonated with people dealing with trauma, PTSD, intrusive memories, and the way single moments can alter entire lives. Mental health professionals used Robert's story to discuss the nature of traumatic memory, how witnessing death, especially of a child, can create persistent, vivid memories that don't fade with time, and how PTSD can remain active for decades. Most significantly, Robert's story sparked a search for the identity of the little girl who had died on June 3, 1984. Using the details Robert provided, the date, the location, the description, researchers and journalists were able to identify the victim. Her name was Emily Patterson. She had been 6 years old when she died. She had an older brother who was now in his 50s, and parents who were in their 70s and still alive. A reunion was arranged between Robert and Emily's family. It was intensely emotional. Emily's mother said that for 43 years, she had wondered about the young boy who had held her daughter's hand as she died, who had been there with Emily in her final moments when her own mother couldn't reach her in time. She said, knowing that Emily wasn't alone, that someone was holding her hand and looking at her with compassion, that's been the only comfort I've had in 43 years of grief. Thank you for being there with her. Thank you for not leaving her to die alone on the street. Robert told Emily's family everything he remembered about her final moments. How she had squeezed his hand, how she had looked at him, how even in those final seconds there had been something peaceful in her expression after the initial fear passed. He told them about the yellow dress with white flowers, about the red ball, about every detail he'd carried for 43 years. For Emily's family, these details were both painful and precious. They gave specificity to a moment that had been abstract and unknowable for decades. The meeting didn't eliminate Robert's PTSD or make the memory go away, but it did provide context and connection that helped. Robert said in follow-up interviews, "For 43 years, the little girl who died holding my hand was nameless and anonymous to me, which somehow made the memory more haunting. Now I know her name was Emily Patterson. I know she had a family who loved her and who still miss her every day. I know that being there with her, holding her hand, gave her family some small comfort in knowing she wasn't completely alone. That doesn't erase the trauma or make the memory less vivid, but it gives it meaning beyond just horror. I was there with Emily in her final moments, and while I couldn't save her, I could be present with her. That matters." The story of Robert Chen and the one thing he could never forget became a powerful testimony about traumatic memory, about how witnessing death, especially violent death of a child, can create memories that persist with extraordinary vividness for entire lifetimes, about PTSD that doesn't resolve even with decades of treatment, and about the search for meaning in experiences that seem senseless. It challenged assumptions that time heals all wounds and that memories fade, showing instead that some experiences are so profound that they remain permanently vivid and present. But perhaps most significantly, Robert's story became a reminder that we never know which moments will define our entire lives, that traumatic experiences in childhood can shape every aspect of our adult existence, and that sometimes the only way to live with unbearable memories is not to forget them, because forgetting may be impossible, but rather to speak them, share them, and find meaning and connection within them. As Robert said in his final interview about the experience, "On June 3, 1984, when I was 13 years old, I held the hand of a 6-year-old girl named Emily Patterson as she died from being hit by a car. That 60-second experience has been with me every single day for 43 years. I can't forget it. I've tried, and I can't. The memory is as vivid today as it was then. But what's changed is that I'm no longer carrying it alone. Emily's family knows I was there with her. Other trauma survivors know they're not alone in having memories that won't fade, and I've learned that some experiences can't be forgotten or healed. They can only be witnessed, honored, and integrated into who we become. Emily's death shaped me into someone who saves children's lives as a pediatric physician. I couldn't save her, but I've saved others because of her. That doesn't make her death meaningful or acceptable, but it means that the memory that's haunted me has also driven me to prevent other families from experiencing what Emily's family experienced. The memory will never leave me, but I've learned to let it coexist with the rest of my life rather than consuming my entire existence. That's not healing, but it's survival, and sometimes survival is the best we can do.